Week 2, where we will cover the principles of screenwriting, as ancient as the Greeks, as modern as Kung Fu Panda. For this week's session, you will need paper and pen, access to YouTube, and to watch the film Erin Brockovich. Listen to the entire lecture and then complete the 3 exercises. A scriptwriter is a storyteller, like a novelist, playwright or short story writer. To write a screenplay, you must be a craftsman, which can be taught, and talented that cannot be taught, but it can be nurtured and developed. The craft helps you understand and apply screen language. The talent is the ability to interpret the world around you, coherently, creatively, dramatically, with meaning and originality. If you can achieve all that, you are a writer, whether you are paid to write or not. To help you achieve this, let's spend this week looking at dramatic structure. First, let's look at its origins. Although preceded in 1894 by Thomas Edison's kinescope, the first hand-cranked camera and projection device, it was the Lumiere brothers a year later who should be crowned the fathers of modern cinema by bringing out their own improved camera projector and by making films themselves. They made dozens of short films capturing everyday Parisian life, but it was their film Watering the Gardener that, in my opinion and those before me, earns the brothers their title. In this charming little film, a straw-hatted gardener waters flowers using a hosepipe. Suddenly the water stops. Behind him stands a naughty prankster standing on the pipe. The gardener looks closely at the end of the pipe. The boy releases the flow and the gardener gets a soaking. The boy is punished with a spanking. It has historical significance because for the first time ever, I'll say that sentence again. It has historical significance because for the first time ever, a drama with a simple 3-act structure was submitted to celluloid. This little film played to an audience of hundreds and easily stands up to the millions of 50-second movies uploaded onto YouTube today. Film is only 114 years old, a mere infant compared to every other forms of drama. It of course began with the Greeks. They are the inventors of the dramatic form and structure that we follow today. In other words, they wrote the rule book and we must follow it. This might sound dogmatic, but by learning the rules you are then free to interpret them in your own way, using your own imagination, your own stories, and telling the world something you think we need to know. So let's have a look at the rules. All films have conflict. All films have a theme to be explored. All films have an emotional journey. And all films follow a basic 3-act structure. Of course, there are exceptions to the rules. Plenty of films lacking one of the above are in circulation, but to all those films and filmmakers, my response is simple: they're not very good. In last week's session, we looked at conflict. This basic principle of conflict being that your main protagonist has a goal or goals she or he wants to reach. Obstacles stand in their way, and by trying to overcome the obstacles they either reach their goal or not, a changed person. But how does your character get there? What happens to them on the way? And how is it all resolved? As a writer, do you need a map to guide you on your way? Some writers write instinctively and have a natural, sometimes unexplored or analysed ability to structure stories. But I'm going to assume that you, like me, need a map, and that map is called the 3-act structure. I will be illustrating my text with the film Erin Brockovich. This is our movie of the week. Act 1. In the first act, we meet the main protagonist. The main protagonist is the character at the heart of the story, and it is their story that dominates the film. Films that use one main protagonist are usually, but not exclusively, the more powerful, because there is enough screen time to explore their story thoroughly. There are, of course, examples of multi-story-lined films such as Magnolia that are the exception to this rule. But for your purposes, I would recommend that you develop ideas that feature one main protagonist before attempting something more complicated. Furthermore, there are plenty of films that appear to have two main protagonists, such as Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Thelma and Louise, but I would argue that they either have exactly the same goals, or one of the characters leads and the other follows. In Thelma and Louise, it is Louise who shoots the rapist and must flee to Texas, and Thelma decides to go with her. Because Louise has no choice but to leave, she is ultimately the main protagonist. Indeed, it is her who is more thoroughly explored during the course of the film. So, in the first act, we meet the main protagonist, a woman, a man, boy or girl, human, animal or alien. They are a certain type of person with views, feelings, opinions and emotions of their own that define how they approach the world, but not just any world, a clearly defined one in which your protagonist belongs and knows and believes in. In Erin Brockovich, we meet Erin. In her 30s, a gorgeous, trashy, intelligent, white and bitter divorcee, mother of two, living in a shabby flat in a grotty town, in debt and desperate to find a job. As you will note in that short paragraph, I have described what type of person Erin is, her circumstances and what she is trying to do. This is the ground you must cover at the beginning of every one of your screenplays. Now, if I was merely describing Erin's life, it would not be dramatic, but by introducing goals from the outset, in this case the want of a job, we are already asking our audience to make an investment in that character, so we were already creating drama. However, to really create drama, we must make sure that something happens. That something is called the inciting incident. The inciting incident is the first important event and is the primary cause for the drama that follows. It could be a bomb going off, the start of war, it could be a woman discovering her husband is unfaithful by finding a receipt from the jewellers. Subtle or unsubtle, the inciting incident changes your protagonist's life forever. In Erin Brockovich, Erin fails again to get a job. Moodily, she drives away in her car and is hit by another car. The car crash is the inciting incident. Let's have a look at another example by returning to Thelma Louise. Again, working class, white, mid-America. Louise is a waitress in a diner and lives alone. Thelma is a bored young housewife. Both are indirectly mistreated by the men in their lives. Thelma and Louise get the chance to go away for the weekend. They stop off at a bar and a man takes Thelma outside and tries to rape her. The inciting incident is, in her attempt to rescue Thelma, Louise, provoked by the rapist, shoots and kills him. Louise's life will never be the same again. It is possible to have the inciting incident before the drama begins, for example in The Big Chill. Old but estranged college friends' lives are shattered by the suicide of one of their gang. The titles sequence shows their friend's corpse being prepared for burial, and as a result of the suicide, the friends are reunited at the funeral and the drama begins. The first act doesn't end at the inciting incident. Your main protagonist naturally reacts to the inciting incident because in a moment their lives have changed and they therefore have no choice but to adjust and formulate a new set of plans and goals than the ones they woke up with. They will formulate new goals according to the type of person they are, and in broad terms attempting one or two things as a result of the inciting incident. They are either going to try to improve their lives or they are going to try to get back to the life they had before. In Erin Brockovich, her former goal was to get a job, but that's not possible without a car, and she doesn't have any money to buy a new one, so her new goal is to sue the other driver, but she loses her temper in court and loses her case. An overriding principle of scriptwriting is that the goals need to be almost impossible to reach and the obstacles almost impossible to overcome. In fact, the goals must be progressively harder to reach as the drama continues. The harder it is for your main protagonist, the better your drama will be. In Erin Brockovich, her attempt to sue fails, and she does not achieve her first goal. Her plan must change, and a new goal appears. Having lost her case, Erin is now desperate. She tells the lawyer who represented her that she must I'll do that sentence again. She tells the lawyer who represented her that he must give her a job. Being the determined lady that she is, the lawyer is browbeaten into employing her. Do you see through my example how Erin's goals and obstacles change every few minutes? Every time she tries to resolve her problems, an even bigger one comes her way. In the case of Erin Brockovich, we are still not ready to begin writing the second act, because life is going to get harder for her yet again, and she must come up with another plan. Again, character-led, Erin discovers a dormant case, where working-class people like herself are trying to sue a powerful corporation over water contamination. She decides to champion their cause, and it is this story that the film is really about. This is the overarching problem. This time, Erin is determined to win. The new plan, which is the overarching story that emerges as a result of the original Inciting Incident, is when Act 1 turns into Act 2. Before continuing, I want to highlight an important point. Moments ago, I used the words being the determined lady that she is, and I described how Erin lost her court case because she lost her temper. This illustrates how everything that happens in drama is character-led. If she wasn't so gobby and argumentative, she might have won her case. If she wasn't determined, she would not have got a job with her lawyer. If she didn't believe in justice, she would have ignored the dormant case and gone home. Because of who she is, this particular, unique story exists. Some films are very much plot-led, such as The Bourne Identity, but the plot still unfolds in a particular way because of who the main protagonist is. Before tackling Act 2, let's recap. In Act 1, you establish your main protagonist and the world they know. An inciting incident changes that world forever. New goals appear, and when the hardest goal to achieve occurs, when the single overarching question or problem needs to be resolved, so Act 2 begins. One final example to really drive my point home. In Jaws, the quiet life of the coastal policeman is preoccupied with minor misdemeanours. His world is shattered when Jaws attacks a girl. His first goal is to maintain or easily regain the status quo by keeping the beaches open. But then the shark attacks again. He knows that the only solution is to somehow destroy the shark, thus really taking him out of his comfort zone. Act 2. Before we move on, remember that drama is about an emotional journey as well as a physical one. Without it, your drama is meaningless. Let's look at the emotional journeys or themes explored in some films. In Thelma and Louise, both are repressed, poor and disadvantaged at the start. They learn how to liberate and love themselves. In The Big Chill, a group of educated middle-class white Americans believe that life is a lot tougher than they ever thought it would be. This scares them, but in the aftermath of their friend's death, they learn to grow up and accept life as it really is. In Erin Brockovich, she is an angry, directionless victim who believes nothing good happens in the world at the start of the film, and learns by standing up for people similar to herself, by fighting for the truth and what is right, that life can be good and meaningful. So our main protagonist is one type of person at the beginning of the film and an entirely different type of person at the end. In other words, they change. Act 2. Remember, during Act 2, your main protagonist is trying desperately to find a resolution to the overarching problem or conflict, and that is almost impossible to achieve. Your main protagonist's conflicts and goals exist because of who they are as characters, because it is the main protagonist who must ultimately learn a lesson and change. Now let's move on and look at the main story beats in Act 2. Firstly, your main protagonist will try all manner of things to overcome the main obstacle and achieve their goal, but they are trying to achieve this without fundamentally changing as a person. They are trying to keep things as normal and familiar to themselves as possible. This sounds natural, doesn't it? Why wouldn't it be? Your main protagonist is human after all, and if they're not, then they display human characteristics. You will be familiar with the expression, "I learnt that the hard way." So it applies to dramatic characters. People don't like to change. People try to stay the same and maintain the status quo. So in the last part of Act 1 or the first part of Act 2, your main protagonist attempts to solve problems without experiencing fundamental change. And because they are trying to reach their goals whilst trying to normalise life, there is space to introduce the subplots. Subplots. Subplots serve the main plot by reflecting, expanding and wrestling with the central theme of the story, and they involve characters on the same side but in conflict with your main protagonist. In other words, they have a different solution to the overarching problem. They could be a policeman's boss, partner, a child of the main protagonist, a parent or a best friend, or all the above. It is possible to follow subplots as part of the antagonist story simply, but sorry, I'll say that sentence again. It is possible to follow subplots as part of the antagonist story simply, but be aware that ultimately the story isn't about them, and we don't want to empathise too much with the enemy. In Erin Brockovich, the subplots are twofold. Firstly, she meets the first decent man in her life and begins a relationship with him, and he agrees to look after her kids while she works. At first this works like a dream, and Erin begins her journey of change, where she begins to see the decency in human beings through her new boyfriend. But inevitably conflict sets in. Her boyfriend has needs and feels ignored as she becomes increasingly embroiled in the case. Secondly, her children also feel neglected and want her home. This makes life even harder for your main protagonist. In Erin's case, not only must she do battle with a powerful corporation, she must also try and keep her boyfriend and kids happy. Boy, has she got a lot on her plate. Remember that your subplots must relate to the central plot, but offer new arguments and insights that feed into the overarching drama or problem. As your subplots develop, so your main protagonist's overarching problem must increase in difficulty, thus compelling your main protagonist to keep going, to remain unstinting in their desire to achieve their main goal. Your drama will come to a very abrupt ending if your main protagonist just gives up. It therefore follows that your main protagonist must have no choice but to continue. In many films, they literally have no choice, because to give up would mean certain death. In Erin Brockovich, a very character-led drama, she has no choice because of her beliefs and principles mean so much to her, but this is substantiated by the fact that if she were to walk away from her job, her kids would go hungry. So what happens next? All characters meet a point of no return when the burdens become so great and the problems so large that there is no way forward or back for your main protagonist. This is called the Act 2 midway point. It is at the point where your characters realises that there is no turning back. The Act 2 midway point in Jaws is when the policeman, the scientist and the hunter set off to hunt down the shark. The policeman, our main protagonist, will not be coming home until Jaws is destroyed. In Erin Brockovich, she realises reluctantly that she cannot stop in her quest because the complainants in the case are totally dependent on her, even though it means missing the first words her baby girl spoke. She has to decide, walk away or stay. Erin decides to stay, but it's not over yet, not by a long chalk. Of course, as your main protagonist has her goals, so your antagonist has his or her or its goal. In Jaws, the goal of the shark is to eat people, and he keeps on eating people until he is stopped. Just as your main protagonist realises or decides that there is no turning back, so things get worse again. I stress the words, it gets worse. If the problem is too easy to solve, then your drama is weak. Remember what I said, that problems must get progressively worse, and they get worse because your antagonist gains ground and is now beginning to succeed. Just as your main protagonist is pulling out all the stops, so of course is the antagonist. Your antagonist, whether it's a shark, a volcano, a violent husband, or in Erin's case, a powerful company, works just as hard as your protagonist. The harder the antagonist works, the greater the conflict, the better the drama. This terrible situation might well be compounded by the subplots. In Erin's case, her boyfriend and children make it absolutely clear that they don't love her anymore because she has let them down. At her lowest point, at her loneliness, they turn their backs on her. And what's even worse is she deserves it because she has been neglecting them. Can it get any worse for Erin? The main protagonist must feel that all is lost, and it must seem in global terms that she or he is right. The lowest point for her is usually the highest point for your antagonist, and it is now that they are at their most powerful, and it is at this point that your antagonist delivers their most decisive blow. At this dark point, your main protagonist has one principal question that they ask themselves. Have they the inner strength, the physical strength, the wit and resources to overcome this huge obstacle? Not only must they find it within themselves, but they must also come up with one last possible solution to their problem. In Erin's case, she has gathered all the evidence she possibly can, but has had the case taken off her by a powerful but insensitive lawyer, and her boyfriend has left her. She finds it within herself to win the case back and present a winning argument. Now it's down to the courts to decide if she and her claimants win or not. In Jaws, the experienced shark hunter has gone crazy and has died. The scientist is missing, so the policeman, the least equipped, must face Jaws alone. Act 2 turns into Act 3 when there is one principal question to answer. Will your main protagonist succeed or fail? And there is one principal answer to that question because all other avenues have been explored. The really good films leave us guessing. Act 3 is the shortest act of all. During Act 3, the single overarching question, the one that was established at the end of Act 1, is finally answered. Your main protagonist resolves that question and either wins or loses. In Erin Brockovich's case, she wins her case, keeps her job, but she does not get back together with her boyfriend, which is the price she pays. In Jaws, the shark dies. In both, as I have originally stated, your character is a different person than the one at the beginning of the film. At the start of Jaws, the policeman, fresh from New York, feels like an outsider in this seaward-facing rural community. By battling with nature, he feels as though he belongs. Again, good adult dramas often ensure that the main protagonist doesn't win hands down. There is usually some sacrifice that they have had to make. It is perfectly fine, however, to write totally happy endings for, say, children. And so we reach the end. Homework. Task 1. Watch Watering the Gardener on YouTube. Search for it by simply typing in the title. Task 2. Watch 2 feature films and write a 500-word synopsis of each one. Describe the first act, the inciting incident, the central goal, the break into 2, the main beats of Act 2, including the subplots, the break into Act 3 and the conclusion. I would recommend repeating this exercise as often as you can in your own time. Task 3. Write a 1,500-word short story that pursues the 3-act structure. Portfolio of ideas. If you wish, you can still keep gathering ideas. Meanwhile, please start looking through your ideas to find the ones that particularly interest you. Start writing a 100-word synopsis on how you might realise each idea for the screen. Keep it very simple. What is at stake? What is the drama in your idea? Ends